Hi, I'm Sharon. I am a pianist. I'm based in LA, and I'm excited to be working on this project with Patricia, who will now introduce herself.
Hello. I am Patricia Wallinga. I am a San Francisco-based composer, among other things. And I am going to be the orchestrator for this, which is very, very exciting.
Awesome. And so we are doing this in part because we had originally commissioned this amazing orchestration of Fanny Mendelssohn's Piano Sonata in G minor?
Yes, G minor.
G minor. And unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we can't have such things as orchestras together for the moment. So we have kicked this can down the road for hopefully just 1 year. And I'm super excited about this project because I love Fanny Mendelssohn's music.
Same.
So I guess first question, since we've already mentioned her name several times, who was Fanny Mendelssohn? So
All right.
let's talk about her.
Patricia, do you mind if I take this one?
Oh, go right ahead.
All right. So you could talk about Fanny Mendelssohn a number of different ways. You could talk about her kind of on her own in a vacuum and just say, she was this amazing female composer from the Romantic era in Germany. But I think what's really interesting about her story and what makes it really complex is that, of course, her brother was Felix Mendelssohn, who is a much more famous composer for reasons I think we're all familiar with. And to me, what's really fascinating both about Felix Mendelssohn and about Fanny Mendelssohn was that they were really creatively intertwined. They were both extremely, extraordinarily talented siblings with really enviable music educations, and they were, doing the whole prodigy thing. And they were really, really supportive of each other in their creative pursuits. So even though Fanny Mendelssohn was discouraged from publicly performing and from publishing her compositions, because that was just not okay for a woman of her class to be doing in the time, she and Felix were really, really really close collaborators through their entire lives. So I think if you look at either of their outputs and the things that they were doing, you can't really pull them apart from each other. So for me, learning about Fanny Mendelssohn, knowing what I know about Felix, has just made both of their stories so much more just deep and colorful and fascinating. I don't know if that really answers your question. I kind of got off on a little tangent there.
No, I love it. Yeah. So she, because of that, ended up writing a lot of chamber music and in particular piano music, right?
Yeah. She was a piano virtuoso, and there are all these anecdotes about how at 13 she was playing all of Bach's Waltz Clavier preludes from memory, and just she was apparently amazingly gifted. And some people at the time even actually said that they thought she was more talented than Felix was. So I mean, that's really cool.
But then they also, at the time, didn't ever give women orchestras because they thought, and I am not joking, that our brains didn't have enough folds in them, which as a female orchestrator definitely doesn't make steam come out of my ears.
So she wrote all this chamber music, all this piano music, including the Piano Sonata in G minor. So Sharon, can you tell us about that piece and what about it made you feel like it was, quote, screaming, "This is concerto material"?
Yeah, I will try to keep this to a reasonable minimum because I think I could probably talk about this for hours because it's been a really fascinating journey for me. So basically, I picked up the sonata intending to learn it as a sonata. And I actually picked it up because there's a moment in the second movement where it's gorgeous. I was talking to Patricia about it, and we both referred to it as the sparkly section. And it just made me go I have to play this. How sometimes you listen to pieces of music and you feel like you're going to die if you can't play that piece of music. That's how I felt listening to the second movement. So I got the music and started sight reading the first movement. I went, this really feels like a piano reduction of a concerto. So I'm going through it, and just the more I dove into it, the more I went this just feels like a concerto. And so I'll give a couple examples of things that kind of tipped me off. It opens up with a tremolo bass in the left hand, which is actually exactly the way that the piano reduction of Felix's concerto in G minor starts. I have the sheet music for both pieces. I opened them up and they both start at the exact same way. And I was like, that's very coincidental. And the primary theme of the first movement happens twice in close succession. One, where it has that tremolo bass, which is supposed to be the timpani for an orchestra. And then it happens immediately again, but in a more pianistic way. So as I was going through the movement, and actually the whole sonata, but especially the first movement, I was finding that it seemed to be written in a way where there were elements that sounded very orchestral. And I know you guys both know this, but you can write for piano a number of different ways because it's such a versatile instrument. You can write for it like it's just a piano. You can write for it like it's an orchestra played by one person where it mimics different instruments and different sounds. You can write for it like it's, doing a vocal line. So I was finding that there were elements of the sonata that were written like they were an orchestral reduction with moments that sounded very pianistic, like they were for a piano soloist. There's a climactic part of the first movement where it's like tutti orchestra chords played against like solo piano chords on different parts of the piano, and it sounds like they're like a call and response. And that's a very interesting passage to write in a piano sonata, because in a piano sonata, the piano is by itself doing its own thing. And so for there to be this like interplay between two different kinds of sound kind of tipped me off and made me go, I think she maybe had these ideas that were for a piano concerto, but because she wasn't able to write for orchestra, she kind of condensed them into a piano sonata form, but maintained that sense of sound and kind of bigness. And I continued to look at the sonata, and I started to study Felix Mendelssohn's G minor piano concerto, and I found that there's so many similarities, and I, that kind of cemented it for me and made me go like, I think she wanted this to be a concerto.
So if I'm thinking back to what Patricia was saying earlier, basically when she was told, you can't have an orchestra, so don't bother orchestrating things, she just turned around and said, fine, I'll orchestrate the entire thing on a single instrument.
Pretty much, yeah. That's what it seems like. By the way, I don't have like some smoking gun letter or documentation to prove this. It's just what I myself know and feel as a pianist, what I've learned playing orchestral reductions myself and playing sonatas and playing concertos. This is all just kind of based on my own experience studying composers' writing. So I will say, that disclaimer, I don't have like historical evidence for it. I just have, what's in my heart as an artist.
And it just feels like justice to finally get to give Fanny an orchestra, which she deserved.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like the orchestral works we do have, like the overture, for example, you can see that she definitely has the chops, and her brain is presumably not falling apart. This seemed like a really cool opportunity. So this all started as a Twitter thread when Sharon was sharing this experience and this feeling, and then I follow both of y'all closely on Twitter because y'all are great Twitter follows. And then Patricia, you came in and you were saying, orchestration, guess what I do? And I was over here in Boston thinking like, well, we are looking for music for next year. So this is just really cool to see it come together, or I guess be in process. So now that it's kind of happening, Patricia, how are you going about this orchestration?
Okay, so you know who else isn't ever given orchestras is 25-year-olds straight out of grad school. I'm 26 now. 26-year-olds straight out of grad school who are women and alive. So I don't get to write for orchestra as much as I want. So when I get to orchestrate something, I really just cherish it. I actually have a background. I spent about 10 years as a classical orchestral double bassist through college when I got injured right around my end of senior year of high school, freshman year of college. But that means that I sat in the back of an orchestra for 6 days a week, doing just enough that I still had to pay attention, but not enough that my brain couldn't also go elsewhere and hear everyone else rehearse. So I have a really, really, really strong just kind of osmosis idea of how orchestral music is, even across different time frames. I'm trying first and foremost to think of this as being a classical orchestra, the orchestra that Fanny Mendelsohn would have had if the world was a just and fair place. But there's always going to be a little bit of that modern aesthetic, and sort of the way that I almost picture this ending up, how much of this is on purpose, how much of it is, again, just kind of the natural, I'm from 2020, I've heard a lot of music, is, you know how some movies that are historical are kind of through the lens of a different time period? Like, my favorite example is if you watch either of the Great Gatsby movies, the one with Robert Redford is the 20s through the 70s lens. The one with Leonardo DiCaprio is the 20s through this incredibly like 2012 lens. So there's definitely going to be an element of that. That was a long sort of philosophical tangent. The literal mechanics of orchestration are, I mean, it's really, this is, like you said, it's orchestrated for one instrument, and it's almost like it's this really detailed like sketch and blueprint, and it's like I'm painting it, I'm coloring it, filling it out, and I do actually use colors for that. I've got here my single-sided Sorry Earth copy of the whole score that I can spread out, and I have a set of colored pencils that I've taken a label maker to. This is just the winds, but I've got, you know, sorted by brightness. Higher instruments are brighter, lower instruments are darker. Winds are green, brass is red. Strings are, this is not purple, blue. I still remember what colors are. And so I'll go through in my notes on the score, and kind of my big first working draft is just coloring everything in with ideas. So a page will look sort of like this, and there's scribbles in my handwriting that I can only sometimes read, honestly, but here what I'm saying to myself, I can now see at a glance without having to have written this out in sentences. Oh, that's clarinet and oboe that are taking this line, and then it trades off, and that's violins and octaves that get added to it. No, wait, clarinet and flute. Again, I still know what colors are. And then this is piano. I think I'm using pink for piano, which is usually xylophone, but again, we're using the orchestra that Danny Mendelsohn would have had, which would have been very light on xylophone, probably no xylophones. Or I'll have little symbols like that's a timpani hit, you know, an X with the blue is bass pizzicato versus straight line is an arco. Trades off like here. Sometimes I'll write in, where do I have it on this next page? I'll write in, oh, these are new notes from the horn that I've taken from the chord and just taken down an octave.
I see.
So it's really, really detailed. Writing for orchestra is just, you have to be so precise to get exactly what you want. And again, it's hard. It takes years and years and years, which again, I was very lucky to have via osmosis mostly, of knowing, okay, if you have a clarinet and a flute, how does that sound different than a clarinet alone or two clarinets, like forming those sounds in your mind. And it's a long, slow process sometimes, but it's fun to just shape it so precisely to the extent of, oh, this note needs to be held half a beat longer than that note because it's like imitating the piano pedaling where it's just a little bit of the sound held over. That was very long. I get excited about this.
No, that's great. And like knowing the piece, when you held up that one page where you showed the clarinet and the clarinet and the flute line, the da 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 da. Knowing the piano version of the piece, and even right now, just seeing that, I could hear it and I don't know if you saw me share a little bit, but like that magical transference from what is essentially a reduction to an actual orchestration is so cool and relies so much on exactly those details. That's so cool.
I mean, even if you're just having a super great performer like Sharon, that's always detail work of, I've worked with pianists especially are like this, but I work with pianists who are, do I voice the second note of this chord more than the third note of this chord? Like that level of detail is kind of already inherent in how pianists tend to think, at least good ones like Sharon. And it makes this work as an orchestration better than I don't know, Violin Sonata or something like that.
Yeah.
As the pianist, or from a pianist point of view, it's also a very fascinating project because I don't know about other pianists, but my teachers have always harped on me about playing the piano like it's an orchestra. Like, don't just play the notes. You have to make this sound like horns, make this sound warm, make this sound like a cello, etc. Which is always fun, but also a little frustrating a little bit, because it's like, if I wanted this to sound like trumpets, I would just go and play the trumpet, And so it's really fun to go through the music with that in mind, that kind of mindset, that framework where I'm going like, this sounds, there's a passage that sounds like a horn call to me, and the first one ends with something that sounds like a trumpet call, kind of underscored by like strings and stuff. And it's really exciting to play it and to study and to think that will actually end up as a trumpet. That will be a horn call. It's really fun to have that next level, that next dimension when I'm working on it. So it's not just happening in my head, because usually it's in my head where I'm thinking this sounds like a trumpet, and then trying to convey that, and then getting to work with Patricia and being like, Patricia, this sounds like a trumpet to me. Let's make it happen. Like that.
I'm like, let's take out red.
And that was actually going to be exactly my next question. So Sharon, you're the pianist, and Patricia, you're the orchestrator, but how are you working together on this? Because there's obviously a lot of back and forth considerations to make this really work, not just as an orchestral piece, but as like a piano concerto.
We're friends in real life, so we talk a lot anyway, so things come up. But the main thing I'm kind of in my process, I'm very, very much deferring to Sharon on, this is the orchestra section, this is the piano section, because she knows the form of this piece just so much better than I do, to be perfectly honest. But then where I come in often is she'll say, and I want this to be like that classical orchestra sound, the one, and I'm the one who knows how to space the flutes and the violins and the clarinets, etc., to make it that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of summing it up, because I know what orchestras sound like. I have played in orchestras as a violinist, but I don't have that orchestration knowledge. Like, I can't go like, this sounds like the flute and the clarinet together to me. I'm just like, this sounds kind of like that windy sound, and I want it to feel like this. How do you make that happen? And Patricia comes in and goes like, I know how to orchestrate that. So, like, if you had me orchestrate this, it would be a disaster. It would just be awful. So it's a very good thing that Patricia is here, and I get to exercise my pianist expertise and be like, this sounds to me like it's a piano solo part, and we should maybe eventually double it up and turn it into octaves or whatever. So it's really cool having that collaboration going back and forth, and just having our brains complement each other that way.
And then with this turning into a piano concerto, there's parts where they're playing together that's going to require a lot more than just what's on the page, which the terrifying part is having to probably eventually write piano parts that are as good as what Fanny Mendelsohn did, which is not my strength. So it's good that I have Sharon to almost reverse that process a little of, I want sort of this texture and rhythm with the piano. Can you help me find a way to make that work, a voicing that sounds right with that kind of thing? But that is later in the process than we currently are.
One thing that does freak me out a little bit is between the two of us, have decided that I'll be writing the cadenzas, because, since it's a concerto, you need cadenzas, and a pianist, it makes more sense. And it's so daunting, because I think, like Patricia was saying about kind of interpreting this through a lens of art, of the modern era, but trying to have it be true to 1800s. I'm like, how do I write something that is really for me to show off, that is like fun and engaging, that I like to do, but that isn't so far away from what Fanny Mendelsohn would have done. And that's where it's a little tough, because this is the first piece I've ever played by Fanny Mendelsohn. I don't know her vernacular very well. I know Felix Mendelssohn's music really well. And so I'm working right now on Felix Mendelssohn's G minor concerto, both because I love it and also because there's, you know, enough parallels that I can kind of learn from it. But yeah, I'm like mildly freaking out a little bit, because even though I think writing cadenza is not as big of a deal as orchestrating it, like I feel like Patricia has, you know, this big thing that she's doing.
Well, writing for piano is crazy hard, at least in my opinion. Composers have different strengths. That one's not mine. I can play just enough piano to be dangerous.
So yeah, I'm like going, oh my God, I have to do this cadenza. But that's about, I think that's the most like stress I feel about this. That and playing it.
Well, and I mean, the thing with cadenza is that isn't necessarily there with orchestrating a, 150-year-old piano sonata, which isn't done anywhere near as much as a performer writing their own cadenza. That element of the past through the lens of when it's made is already just such a huge historical thing. Like, which piano, I want to say there's Beethoven piano concertos that have Clara Schumann cadenzas.
Yeah.
And that don't necessarily sound like strictly Beethoven. So some purists are like, oh, we should play the ones that are written by the guy who premiered it 2 years after Beethoven wrote it. And because Clara's are not, they always call her Clara. They never call her Schumann, this type of person. This straw man that I'm constructing never calls her Schumann. Clara's was not historically accurate. I have met
these straw men, so yeah, they exist.
They exist. They exist, and they buy a lot of orchestra tickets. So I probably shouldn't make fun of them. You're a cool orchestra, cool people buy your tickets.
We do this all the time. Like, I
mean, it is really tough trying to thread that needle between like programming the stuff that you know people love, and like honestly, a lot of us do actually love the old canonic classical stuff. Like, there's a reason to play it, but also making way for the new, and making way for like maybe not even new composers, just composers who have always been there but that we haven't played. It's tough because you try to balance it, and you're always going to have people who are pissed off that you're not playing more Beethoven, or people who are pissed off that you're playing too much Beethoven, and it's just really tough. And it ultimately comes down to the discretion of, you know, the performer and the programmer. And I think it just ultimately comes down to the fact that you have so many organizations and so many ensembles doing different things that you are able to get all this variety of stuff. So, but it's a very hard needle to thread.
With someone like Fanny Mendelsohn, or with someone like Sharon, I know you're kind of, one of your big things as a performer is you're kind of an expert at Cécile Chaminade and Louise Farrenc and Clara Schumann, and these women who have been here for 150, 200 years, however many. I can't count past 8. I have degrees in music. But it's this idea that is constantly, I mean, you see, if you look at music curriculums from 1910, they still mention women composers, but it was a handful of them, and it was just, Amy Beach and Ethel Smith, and before that there weren't any women. And then you flip to these days to your average conservatory bro, and it's, Kasia Sarajevo and Sofia Gabidalina and Jennifer Higdon, and before that there weren't any women. And it just keeps going, and it's the same with non-white composers. Samuel Coleridge Taylor, 100 years old, but everyone, you know, Scott Joplin has an opera and no one does it. And everyone makes a huge stink about, we commissioned a black composer. That makes us woke. And yes, that's awesome. And I want to see that. But I also really want to see Trumanisha, which I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of, but that's Scott Joplin's opera, which is apparently amazing and barely recorded. And part of the reason that I'm so passionate about this project is that I want to live in a world that recognizes, hey, we have always been here. It's not an art form that's been 18,000 straight white men, and then the idea popped out of everyone's head in 1979 that other races and genders existed. We have always been here.
And it's really fascinating to see, like you're saying, I'm thinking of, like, we've talked about Cassiani, like Cassi of Constantinople in the year 800 or so. And yet 1,000 years later, when Clara Schumann was composing, there's that famous quote of hers, which Sharon, you can probably correct me, but something along the lines of, I should stop composing. Why should I think I can compose when no woman before me has done it? Mm-hmm. And it's
the first time I ever heard that, it was my junior year of undergrad. I went to Indiana University, and it was Dr. Ayanna Smith's history class, whose name I feel like I should mention because she is, can I say badass?
You can say badass, I think.
Yeah, and she was, the teacher of the Beethoven through today history class that, yes, spent an equal amount of time on the Eroica Symphony as it did the entirety of jazz. And there were jazz majors in this class. But she, despite this like really Western canon, great white men class, she is, among other things that she does really well, a scholar of composers of color and women composers. And I was just in this huge funk of, I'm in this male-dominated department. I am working twice as hard as all these men around me, and I'm getting half as far because I'm a loud, pushy woman who doesn't know her place. And I saw this letter from Clara Schumann that we studied. We studied her easily as much as we studied Bobby, probably more. And we studied these letters, and it just broke my heart to see this, icon, this idol of mine, feeling the same exact things that I felt. And just like we have always been here, we've always felt these feelings. I want to live in a world where the next generations of us, of composers of color, which is obviously not me, I'm so white I get sunburns indoors, but solidarity. But yeah, I want to live in the world where the next generation of composers who are not white men don't ever have to feel the way that Clara Schumann felt in those letters, because we've been feeling that way. It's been 150 years, and it's changed. I mean, no one's told me that my brain isn't wrinkly enough to write for orchestra, but it, in a lot of ways, hasn't changed.
The fact that no one is giving a crap about your lack of brain folds is not necessarily a sign of like immense progress. You've just gotten a little bit above truly awful. And
the bar has been raised slightly, just an inch above the floor.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, even if that small amount of progress has been made, like you were saying, the curriculum in 1910 was saying that, these were the first women composers. And if we're now seeing the same thing, like, yes, maybe there's an inch of progress, but also it's not given that we're staying here, right? Like, we have to make sure it keeps moving forward. It's not going to stay even an inch off the floor by itself.
Yeah.
Like, we have to keep working at it.
The risk of a little bit of progress is the idea that I've heard so many times of sexism in composition doesn't exist anymore. There's Kaija Sariaho. She had a premiere at the Met. Great, awesome. Or no, it wasn't even a premiere. It was after having made the rounds in Europe. But yeah, awesome. Are we going to still be doing that opera in 10 years, in 20 years? Can we commit to that? Can we go back a generation and bring those works in more? Or do we stop caring once the commission check's been cashed? That's kind of the thing. Anyone can make news and commission.
Once you check the box.
Once you've checked the box, it can't go away. And again, I think that's something that's really neat with this project is, yes, it's new, but it's also, we've always been here. Fanny Mendelssohn's always been here.
Yeah, and
I didn't expect to get this emotional.
No, that's why we do this.
I want to just fast forward to when we can actually premiere it and have it be rehearsed and played in person, because I want to hear this like literal symphony of sounds. Like I look at the page I play on the piano and I can like see or hear in my head like this potential. And I do get emotional thinking about it, because we've been talking about how Fanny Mendelssohn wasn't able to write for orchestra, and like just imagine the things that she could have done if she did, if someone had given her the, you know, the space and the ability to write for orchestra. Like think of what she could have given us and what we have been denied. You know,
when we ignore marginalized composers, we lose great art. We just actively lose it.
Right, like when we promote non-canonic composers, or we promote marginalized composers or women composers, we're not just doing it to be like, look, we're progressive, or look, we have a woman composer. We're doing it so we can get more art. We get more art made from different points of view. So like this, what you get is you get more art. And as someone who loves art, that's amazing to me. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the canon is there for good reasons, but a lot of music is left out for really terrible reasons, and that's really the only question we're asking here. The only thing that we're doing in doing what you said, Sharon.
Yeah, like it's not a zero-sum game. I'm not saying like we should stop playing Beethoven, we should play this instead. I'm just saying I love Beethoven. Like I really genuinely adore Beethoven. I think we to listen to Beethoven and then to also be able to listen to someone else. Like I'm just very greedy in the end. I just want more music to enjoy and to play and to listen to. So anything that helps to get us there where we have like way more music than we currently do now, like to me, that's a plus. So the fact that as an organization you are willing to take on this project already says a lot, because generally ensembles don't kind of just take on bold new project that they're just kind of phone in. So like the fact that you guys are being a part of this and commissioning it and kind of being with us in every step of the way is really, really encouraging, because it means that there is passion there is someone who is willing to put the work in to do the work justice.
Yeah, no, it's so cool and exciting to be able to work with this group of people, like to work on this project with y'all, and also in Eureka to work with other people who really deeply care about this. Like everyone on the team, everyone on the board. It's just really an incredible time here.
Yeah.
It's amazing to have that kind of
support. Piano to come out of Twitter, like to happen because of Twitter. Like
we should market it like that.
You know, yeah, honestly. I mean, I put Twitter in my bio. It's part of my professional bio. It is.
I was kind of wondering if it was going to be there, and then like right before the call, I was like, I wonder, and I checked, and it warmed my heart to see
it's my main career accomplishment.
And what an accomplishment!
I mean, it got us here. That's
it did. It did.
Yeah.
That's true. All right. Well,
I hope you can get stuff out of my loud soapboxing that doesn't offend every donor.
Yeah, I'll do the like official farewell, so we have a thank you and goodbye on this, and I'll just stop recording, but we can stay on.
All right. Cool.
Great. So Patricia and Sharon, thank you so much for your time and for your work on this really exciting project.
Thank you for having us, for interviewing us, for talking about this, and for making it happen.
It's just fingers crossed, fast forward to when we can all do this in person.
Yeah.
And we all look forward to hearing it, the full orchestration live, coming to you hopefully fall 2021.
Yes, hopefully by then a bunch of people exhaling very forcefully in a room together will not be a threat to public health.
Everyone wear a mask, please. Please.
Wear a mask and see y'all soon.
All right.
All right. Bye.
Bye, guys.
you.